Yeah, I'm ready when you are. Right, everyone, get feedback going. It's my pleasure to bring Daniel Marsh-Patrick to the Birmingham Power BI user group. Daniel came all the way from New Zealand just for this, right, Daniel? Just
That's exactly it, yeah. Can't complain.
Well done.
Turned up this morning, running on fumes.
Well, Daniel is a Microsoft MVP. He's the creator of the Deneb custom visual. Some of you, I'm sure, will know of. So I'm very excited to give you the page and take it away, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. The workbook is downloadable. So there's a QR code. There's a very short URL. I'll put it back up at the end if anybody misses it. You may not want it after this. Who knows? We'll see what happens. So a little bit about me before we kick off. So I'm Daniel. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP based out of New Zealand, the South Island, if anybody knows New Zealand, one of the islands. I work for myself for a company called Cochivo, just doing consulting, mostly on an ad hoc basis, people that need expertise in visualization and Power BI. I also work for a company called Discovery AI in Australia, based out of Perth. And we focus on using the Microsoft Data Stack and Power Platform to deliver environmental analytics solutions for various people around the world. In terms of community credentials, I'm a member of the Power BI Core Visuals team. So I don't know if anybody knows, there's a community team of people that are working on improving the core visuals in Power BI. So if you don't like core visuals, there's a little hashtag here, PBI Core Visuals. Drop your aggravations on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you like. And there's a lovely guy at Microsoft called Miguel Myers, who's a PM on, he's tasked with improving visuals. He'll hoover them up and he may reach out to you and have a chat. I'm also a super user on the Power BI community forums, and I author and maintain for my sins 4 custom visuals in AppSource. So everyone's familiar with the concept of Power BI custom visuals? No one? Yeah, there's a lot of nodding. We'll take that as a win. So I currently maintain Deneb, which we'll talk about today, the violin plot, HTML content, and my first visual, which kind of started me on this dark path, the small multiple line chart. Power BI didn't have them. I wanted them. I learned how to do them. And it's really just about how a young person that wanted Power BI to do things better ended up where he is today. But hopefully the tooling we'll talk about will allow you to do the same a lot more easily. So today, this presentation is normally an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's going to be quick. We're going to try and squeeze in the best bits. I'm happy to talk the hind legs off this thing. So if anybody wants to ask questions afterwards or even during, we'll choose those strategically maybe. See what happens. We can talk more about it either here or offline. We're going to talk about what kind of why this is a thing, because it's not a very Power BI way of doing things. So we're going to do a very, very quick primer on the approaches that we're talking about today, why we would do that, talk about Deneb a little bit, do a demo, show you some further resources to hopefully get you inspired, hopefully answer some questions. So I don't know how many people can relate. I'm more of a full stack developer. My background is in originally architecture, modeling, ETL, gradually moving into the visual layer. So I picked Power BI up in 2014, back when it was in Excel. And I found the visuals frustrating and they continue to frustrate me. And one of the things that really bugs me, and it may bug you, some of you maybe relate, if you've got to deliver a business intelligence solution, your stakeholders all see the stuff at the end, the stuff that gives them the insights and the visuals. And I don't know how many people get managers saying, how's this going? I'm not seeing anything. Yeah, we're busy building the model. We're busy building the measures. The ETL's taking time. You'll see stuff. Don't worry. It's going to happen. And then at the last 2 weeks of the project, you've got to slam out a whole bunch of visuals. And then you get frustrated because some things can't be done or your vision isn't quite right. Or you've got all the kind of considerations that John's talked about earlier to bear in mind. You've got things like A/B testing and getting people to qualify what works, what doesn't work, and it just becomes a bit of a mess. And it's what you got to remember is those visuals you put up, that experience is what gets that's the windows you work. So they don't care about the modeling. They don't care how beautiful your model is. I do. I love beautiful model, but most stakeholders don't. They just want something that works and they want something that gives them what they want to know. So with Power BI, we could bend the rules a little bit in our data model because we have a language called DAX. That lets us build measures, lets us build calculated tables and columns. And we can do a lot of stuff there to bend visuals to our will. We can change contexts. We can do all kinds of wonderful stuff to calculate those results that we all trust. With Power Query, when we're getting and transforming our data, we can use a nice visual interface. But when or if we have a more complicated use case come up, we can open the advanced editor. So everyone's familiar with them, the language that sits in Power Query. If you're familiar with Power BI, you can do that if you want. You can stay in the UI, but you can delve in. You can be smart. You can be economical. We don't have that with visuals. Well, we sort of do, but basically what you see on the pane is what you get, with some exceptions. But primitively, you choose a visual, you customize it. There you go. So in terms of what's available to us, because it's not entirely true that we don't have flexibility, but if we look at this is a simplified diagram of what comes out of the box of Power BI. So in terms of complexity from left to right, your average report builder will stay on this area here. They're going to choose core visuals. They're going to choose custom visuals. They're going to try and find what they need for the use case they have. There are people that want to go further, and often people do. This is a journey I've been on. It's a journey some of you may be on at present. There's a long way to go with it if you really like it, but we can be creative with our modeling. We have the opportunity to use R and Python. So anyone familiar with either of those languages? Use them in Power BI? No one's used them in Power BI? They're okay, right? They're not. Yeah, but you can't interact with them. You can't, you publish them to the service, you get limited functionality. Everything is delegated off to an R or Python instance on your machine. If you're developing locally, when you publish it up to the service, it's got to have the libraries that Microsoft provide. You filter context changes in a report. That sends a query to the visual. The visual then delegates that code off to some server. There's a cold start. The user experience is slower than you would like. So there are sacrifices. You've got portable skills. R and Python used in a lot of places. Great that you can use them in Power BI. Very, very hard to get the kind of feature parity that you want if you're building a visual that has your own flavor. Some businesses are very, very specific. They have very bespoke requirements, and some of that stuff you can't negotiate around. The environmental industry is a perfect example. There are visuals that are known for decades in that industry that people know and trust, and they build that intuitive reading of it. It's not always intuitive to you or I, but it's something it's their bread and butter. But Power BI can't do it. You might be able to fudge it with R and Python, but sometimes you just need a bespoke visual. For those that dare tread further, any custom visual you would consume from AppSource is written in the Visuals SDK. The Visuals SDK is something provided by Microsoft that allows you to write custom visuals. Has anybody tried? There's usually one. This is exciting. Anybody know how to do web development? HTML, CSS, JavaScript. These are terms that you may be familiar with if you haven't used them. But the websites you consume every day, the technology that puts those experiences in front of you, you have to then learn a new set of skills. In addition to being a BI professional, you have to be able to learn how to do web development if you want to take this on, or have access to a team of web developers. And in the Southern Hemisphere, we don't have very big companies. We have to try and figure things out. So this is kind of my journey. I kind of took this path and ended up learning how to write visuals. But this is not for everybody. You can't learn web development on demand. Not only do you have to know web development, you have to know Power BI. You have to understand how those areas mesh. So if you have access to a developer, you have to coach them as to what filter context is and all these kind of things that are very unique to Power BI. Now, a lot of people have come along and filled in some of the stuff on the left. So there are gaps. So people have come along and written custom visuals that provide sometimes platforms, sometimes graphical user interfaces that let you design your own visuals. So I don't know if any of you have heard of ValQ and InfoRiver. That's a financial visual by Lummel. It's really, really powerful if you're in the finance space, very compliant with IBCS standards, if you're familiar with those. And then we've got things like Sundance, which is more of an exploratory visual. That's by Microsoft. It's a small graphical user interface. You can drag some fields in and see what happens. We've got the Synoptic Panel, which is by SQL BI. That's been around almost as long as Power BI has. That lets you build SVG images that bind data to them. You can shade or do various things, just very simple things, but very, very powerful. It's still a user interface. It's still intuitive enough. Anybody heard of Charticulator?
Yeah.
Hey, brilliant. Charticulator is sadly now dead.
Is that confirmed by Microsoft?
They will not be developing it as aggressively as they
Right.
probably should.
That's that.
They're going to support it. At the minute, they have no plans to continue evolving it.
Yeah.
It was a great breakthrough because what it let us do was break visuals down into primitives. So, John, again, I'm going to quote you a lot. Best way to sometimes approach a visual problem, whether it's a page or a specific chart, pen and paper. You know, I don't know. When I was a kid at school, I learned how to draw a chart on squared paper with a pen and a pencil and a ruler. You have to understand how things go together. It's a different way of thinking to Power BI, but it was a really great paradigm. And this is almost the paradigm we'll focus on mostly today. Over the right-hand side, there's not a lot. I learned, for people that don't want to go all the way, but don't necessarily want the confines of a user interface, I released a visual called HTML content, and my intention for that was to just give people access to things like rich text, bold, italic, simple stuff. And then people came along and built whole visuals in it that were animated and took up whole pages, and they had artwork, and it was absolutely eye-opening. But that was still quite limited. So today we'll talk about Deneb. Deneb sits kind of to the left, but almost to the center. But it is still in this kind of half of the spectrum. So what we're trying to say is if you want to do more with visuals, you might have to roll your sleeves up a little bit. But not as much as having to learn a whole new paradigm, web development, understanding all the quirks. So yeah, sorry, I presented Power BI. It's pretty cumbersome, but everything's in here. That visual was built with Deneb, by the way, that little thing we saw. That's all data driven. It's in Power BI, works off bookmarks. So we usually pick and choose a visual. We find the one we like, you know, and a chart chooser is a great tool. Where's my mouse? There it is. We can come over here. We can choose, you know, we've got categorical data that's not really linear in terms of time. We can have a bar chart. We can have a column chart for months of the year or years. We know roughly what the case is. But the thing is, Microsoft give us a better tool when you know the right shape, because Zoom it is by Microsoft. There's 6 different kinds of charts here that all have very subtly different use cases, but they're basically entirely different visuals. So you've got to find your use case and you pick it off. So we've got some pretty basic bread and butter type visuals that work very, very well. And they're good for when we know what we want to do. You know, if we've got a case like, you know, it's data over a year, months of the year, left to right, culturally here, makes sense. Put a measure on the y-axis and there you go. Similar thing if you need to rank your data, bars work really well because we don't perceive angles very well. So the pie chart discussion we had previously, our intuitive senses judge length better than angle, which is another argument you might want to use with the people that like pie charts if they care. But we kind of know these things. But what about when we want to explore our data a bit more? We want to look around. We want to see. We don't necessarily know what visual we want to use. We want to possibly, I don't know if anybody's actually done this. Some people do. You combine cool visuals together on top of each other to try and, has anyone done that? Maybe put a line chart on a bar chart or
a line chart on top.
Yeah.
Chart.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got to worry about how they scale and get all the axes to line up. And then there's the performance thing, because the more visuals you have to a page is more queries, is more, you know, it's all stuff that slows your report down and creates friction with the user experience. And then what happens if there's a property you want but doesn't exist? So if you ever wanted to just tweak something on a chart, you just can't do it. It's addictive when you can have that power and you want to know how to do it. But these are things that, as report creators and people that want to provide the best visual experiences for our readers, we would like. So what we try and do instead, you know, this paradigm we're introducing, the Charticulator tool we talked about has this approach. Tools like Tableau have this approach, if people have used Tableau. Instead of starting with something that we know about, we start with our data and we break our data and we start to play with its scaling, its positioning, and we add what we call marks. These are things that bind our data and display it on a page, and they have properties like width or height that gets bound to the data. And then we have aesthetics, which are little customizations we want to put on. We might want to change its fill color or you know, things like that. And it's nice if we can kind of build those up in a iterative way, you know, so we can explore and we can try the dead ends that don't work, and we can back out and we can try something else and see how that works. And sometimes we refer to this as a grammar of graphics. So we're thinking about a visual language here. Almost when we talk about charts, we think about how do we draw it? How do we build it up? You know, if I'm going to draw that chart with pen and paper, how would I describe it? I would draw lines for my axes. I would find, and I'll actually, I'm skipping ahead. I got a better slide for this. Firstly, the concept of a grammar of graphics, before I get to that aforementioned slide. This is coined by Leland Wilkinson, who sadly is no longer with us, but he has a book called The Grammar of Graphics, which defines a language for charts, ultimately, data, maps, all kinds of things, how to visualize data on a page. It is not bedtime reading. It's complicated. This is trying to boil a very good, dense book into a single image, which he produced. It's a bit more complicated, but hopefully it gets the idea. When we've got our source, which is typically our data, we want to run it through a pipeline of different things, different jobs, and each of these jobs has something to do. It doesn't care about the other ones. It just knows it has something to do. So we take our data and we move it through. We perform algebra, transformations. We scale it on the page. We generate any stats we need. We work out where it should be oriented and positioned through coordinates and aesthetics. And these don't care about anything else, as I say. If you were to write a program to draw a chart, you would probably want to adopt this paradigm, because if you do it the wrong way around, you're going to get hurt. Or, well, you're not going to get hurt, but you know, it's going to test you. I'm kind of, you know, it's my thing. I can make it sound exciting. So when we talk about the conventional way, we talk about an imperative design. This is something that we have to sort of describe from the ground up. How is this going to work? If we want to make a simple bar chart, and bar charts, they're not exciting, but they get the job done. They're very, very portable and useful, and we all understand them. So we're going to work with bar charts a lot today. If we have a simple data set here, it's just a table. We've got 5 locations, and each one has a measure. So we've got five rows. What we want to try and do is make a bar chart from this. So when we think about drawing it out, if we were software, this is the imperative way of doing it. This is the not very exciting way. But this is how we have to appreciate things. So we start with our data, and then on a visual, we've got physical size on the page, X pixels wide, Y pixels high. Now with some charts, we're used to seeing our Y-axis go up. That's how we read it. Computers don't think that way. They go top, left, down. Same way you might read a dashboard when we talk about the Z order of a dashboard. Try and put your most important thing here. Coordinate systems think that way. So computers have to think like this. We then have to think about encoding those location names to those physical coordinates, and that's called scaling. So we've got a certain amount of height on our screen, could be 10 pixels, could be 300. But somehow we've got to evenly space those locations out. So the computer, whoever's doing this, needs to work out what that even spread is. So we've got this little placeholder here that represents each of those rows. And what we're also doing is we're thinking about the direction of that. So with bar charts and categorical variables, these columns, top down is actually quite good. But for something else, where a category goes along the x-axis, bottom up is better, at least in most cases. We've also got to think about the x-axis in this case. We're going to put our temperature values along here because we can judge that length very, very quickly. Similar thing, we've got so much width, we've got a certain amount of space to scale it. Now, we can see from the table that we're kind of angling, we're starting around the 11s, we go up to about the mid-15s. Now, with bar charts, and a lot of these books will tell you, particularly ones John mentioned, Storytelling with Data, Big Picture, Big Book of Dashboards, anything by Steve Few and Tufte, will tell you that there's generally a rule with bar charts that you should never really start them from the lowest range, because that's deceptive. So generally you start those at 0. So what we're going to be able to do is work out that even though we've got 0 to say 15.4 for Auckland, we don't have 15.4 pixels. So we have to work out how to scale those values. Really just use the touch screen. No, skipping ahead. Bookmarks, Daniel. But we read axes. So that physical stuff computers care about, it just puts it on page. We read these things. We put axes on, we put labels on. We know where Auckland is. We know where Tauranga is. We know what the temperature is. We start from 0. We've got just over 15.4. So 16 is a nice number. But the computer's going to sort that out. And then finally, the marks and aesthetics. So when I talk about a mark, the mark is this bar, this rectangle. That's our data point. We're going to have one of those per location, and we're going to set the width of that to match our temperature variable. Now, this isn't sorted, and it probably should be. You should really try and have the highest to lowest, but you can very easily go through that, and your brain will tell you that Auckland has the highest temperature. There's 5 series. We're not going crazy. We would probably sort it, but this is good for our brain. Our brain understands this. So we've taken all this stuff here and made something that makes sense. This is kind of what's going on under the hood. We don't want to think about that beyond now, but this is something to give you the appreciation of how computers think, how systems think. So if we were going to turn that on its head and make something called a declarative system, so that's basically almost like saying, I want that, but I don't want to think about how it's built. I just want the results, and then I want to tweak it. We want to introduce what we call the grammar of graphics framework. And what we almost want to do is take a set of instructions or a specification, and we want to render that as a chart. We want to tweak it, play with it, and maybe we want to change that mark to a different type. We saw bars, maybe about lines or circles or something entirely different, different shapes, custom shapes, horses, zebras, whatever. What if we want to put more marks on top? We want to aggregate our data, so we've got 5 data points for each place, but we've got an average temperature across all of them. That's one line. There's all these things that we can think about. It's very powerful when you start talking in this way, but they take a lot of work to deliver systems that do this. So for those of you that are familiar with Tableau, that's basically their bread and butter. They've got a very, very good visualization engine, but they've got a massive R&D department building what is effectively a grammar of graphics system. I'm one person. I can't do that. But what I can do is, as you saw the diagram, meet you halfway. In this case, these UIs are still subject to constraints. If you want a feature, it may not be there. It's like a property in Power BI. It might not be there. You've got to wait for Microsoft to develop it. You've got to wait for the person delivering the software to develop it. So UIs are great. They're intuitive. They're quick. But sometimes if you want to have full control, you have to sacrifice a little bit of that. So trying to find something between, we're talking about web code, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. These are probably foreign concepts, particularly to a lot of people in this room. Has anyone come across JSON in their travels? There's a few people, a few hands up. What's nice about JSON is it is a data structure. What's that?
You want to know what's nice?
It's nicer than code.
Oh.
It's structured. Yeah, it's structured. It's got repeating things. It's got key and value pairs. I mean, for those that don't know JSON, you could probably look at that and you could tell how many hobbies I currently have, at least that I want to talk about. How many pets I have and the details about them. You know where I'm from, you know my age. You can read this. It's not code. It's something that you can, it's a halfway house between the machine and you. Think about, if you wanted to write out a set of instructions, this is not too scary. And this is what we can think about with a visual language. Is there a tool that lets us do this? Doesn't have a user interface, doesn't necessarily get stuck. We have to wait for the developer, those kind of things. Can we just get down to saying what we want? And can it draw it for us? There are languages called Vega and Vega Lite. And the University of Washington Interactive Data Lab originally built these. That's a very, very prestigious set of people out in the US that are solely dedicated to data viz research. They're the best of their breed. And they continue to, even though they've moved on to different roles, they continue to develop and maintain these languages. You use JSON to build a list of things you want. It has an interpreter that turns that into a visual. Vega Lite is the easier one. So it's difficult to kind of be analogous for people in the room that haven't used JavaScript, but there is a tool called D3. Don't know if that rings any bells with anybody. Yep. Somebody's nodding. D3, it sits on top of JavaScript, and it almost makes it simpler, but it's still pretty weird to figure out. Vega sits on top of that, makes it slightly easier. Vega Lite sits on top of Vega, and it really does a lot of common use cases well. So my advice is Vega Lite's good to begin with these concepts we're going to talk about. We're not going to Vega today, but I will show you a very quick comparison in terms of, so this, you don't need to read this, you just need to see how big it is. For those at the back that may have trouble. This is a custom visual that Microsoft make available for you to learn how to write your own using JavaScript, HTML, CSS. There's a lot of files here. So firstly, you need a lot of files. Just got to throw a lot of files in a project. Yeah, that's how it works. But this one is the most important one. This has the meat of the logic that you need to make a simple bar chart like the one we just saw went on the page work, even using D3, which makes it easier. I'll just talk and scroll. I'm not going to go into the details of this because firstly, we don't have time. But I can keep talking and scrolling and talking and scrolling. And this is 744 lines of code. This puts bars on a page. It also gives you property bindings for the menus and stuff. It does give you a little bit extra stuff. But this is all that imperative stuff we talked about. I've got to work all that out. If I want to write a visual, this is hard. It takes time. Your stakeholders don't appreciate that. And it's not like you can just grab the Microsoft visuals and add what you want to them. You can't. You got to do it from scratch. Vega is a bit simpler. So this is the website published. You can see some examples. They've got lots of different kinds of charts, some of which you already know won't be possible in Power BI, particularly with regards to things like box plots and week plots, an interesting one. But you can see there's lots of different things we can do with Vega we can even build games. So you can get Pac-Man in it. It's the first thing anybody does. Yes. There's a guy, Vahid, who does the Persian user group. He's built a boss key for Power BI reports where he's got a bookmark that brings Pac-Man up, and then you can hide it, which is quite cool. But they have a lot of documentation, so I'm not going to go into the fundamentals of the languages. But the key thing is, if we look at a bar chart here, we can work it out. This is JSON. It's a lot more verbose than what we saw in the example. We can see that this is our data. Let me just zoom in a bit. Sorry. My apologies for the people at the back. This is our data. And then this is the stuff that we need to do. We scale our data. We just say where it goes to X and Y, and so on and so forth. So this still looks a bit scary. It's not that scary when you get used to it, but I appreciate that we're showing you new stuff, and you're thinking, why on earth? Fortunately, we've got Vega Lite. We can do a lot of stuff in Vega Lite with a lot less work. We can still see some very usable examples, some basic stuff, some stuff, histograms, density plots, things that Power BI can't easily do. Lots of varieties on scatter plots, bubble plots with categories. All these things are just not possible in Power BI without significant modeling and numerous amounts of technical depth. Area charts, stream graphs, heat maps, line charts, parallel coordinate plots, multiple axes. Those things are scary, but sometimes they make sense when you've got variables with multiple scales. Linear regression. Where's the mouse? Linear regression, where you've got a lot of scattered plots, but you can actually show some correlation. All these things are possible. Layering, box plots, all kinds of stuff. Emojis for categories, all kinds of things. Give it a try. Partially shading bars over the top of a line, all kinds of things like that. If we were to look at the bar chart example in Vega Lite, whoops, it's that big. And this much of it is data. And these two things don't really matter. This is what's called a schema, which defines because JSON is very flexible and very extensible. A schema gives it structure. Think of that as the language definition that says this is Vega Lite. All we say is draw a bar, map the x-axis to the A field, which is this one here, and map the y-axis to the B field. And then all the axes and everything are drawn for us. So this is nice. This is something we can get behind. I hope I could. And you might. Who knows? Deneb is the implementation of Vega and Vega Lite in Power BI. It is a custom visual that you can get from AppSource. It has virtually none of the shortcomings of R and Python because it uses the same technology stack as Power BI. So interactivity, tooltips, all that good stuff that you might want to do works. With caveat, to put a little asterisk there. Power BI has some limitations that we can't work around. You use JSON, you get a visual. There's a website, and there's also the links there that we just saw to the documentation. The Deneb website I maintain and is available for the visual itself, but this shows all of the stuff you might need to know for Power BI. So with Power BI, I can't cover it all today. how to map to the data set. We've got a simple example, how to format values. If you like custom formatting in Power BI, we've got theme color binding. So if you like to change your themes up, we can do that. We've got pattern fills. Anybody ever wanted to do little stripy lines on the bars? We can do that. We've got templating, more importantly. So if you build a design that you like, you can export it as a template. You can put it in source control. All kinds of things. How the interactivity needs to work. This is a bit weird, but when you get used to it, you'll understand why it is the way it is. This is a Power BI thing, but we're working on building. Say we, it's really me, but I like to think there's more of me. Sometimes it makes me feel more sane about it. But we have a community. How to do these things, because how Power BI thinks under the hood is not intuitive, but we try and create bindings for these languages to these pieces of functionality so you can go further. So this is all here. And very, very quickly, because we started a little bit late, I've got to get busy. Deneb is available through AppSource. So for those of you that don't know, find the mouse, you can go to the ellipsis, although they have changed that. I don't know if any of you have seen the on-object formatting that's just come out. Wherever it's found, you can do it there as well.
It's challenging.
It's challenging. Yes, challenging is very, that's not what I would use, but let's use yours. That's diplomatic. We can get more visuals. Always, the first one's always slow because it's got to cache all the visuals. And I'm on a new Wi-Fi network. But we can go to AppSource. We can, there's a couple, probably 500 visuals now. If I just do a search for Deneb or Vega, I'll do Deneb. The visuals available for you to add to your reports. The important thing to note is this is certified. So does anybody know the difference between certified and uncertified visuals? Certified basically have been reviewed by Microsoft, and it does not do anything malicious with your data. So every update I do, Microsoft review it, and they put the stamp on it. And if it never gets through, it never gets updated. So the version that's in there is always going to work. What's nice about visuals like this is that if you have to build your own custom visual and you want it certified, you've got to send it off to AppSource. So it needs to be publicly visible in the marketplace. Microsoft have to review it, and then you're responsible for maintaining it. If you build a visual inside one of these, I'm responsible for keeping the thing working, which is great for you. Anyway, so I've already got it in my report, so I can add it. And this doesn't look like any other visual because it's not. So what you've got to think about with Deneb is it's like a table visual underneath. So if I have a table visual and I'm going to put my location name and my average temperature, I've got one row, just like we saw with that example. I've got a location and a measure. Under the hood, it's going to look the same. So if I jump in here, I'm going to add the fields to the visual first. That's what you got to remember. When we add the fields, we then get the ability to edit. So if any of you have used Infographic Designer, Charticulator, we get this little extra option here. Let's open a different part of the UI. We can actually build our own UI inside this. So Deneb has a landing page. There's a couple of examples. You can choose from some existing examples, and you can map your, let's get the simple bar chart. And we'll map the category to location name and the measure to average temperature. And it's a simple bar chart there by description, but it's a kitchen sink bar chart in that we've built in all the things you got to think about for simple interactivity. So it's cross-filtering, cross-highlighting. If I click create, I get my JSON. Let me just increase the font size. Is that bearable at the back? Can you folks see that? Does that work? Yeah. We've got our JSON on the left. Don't knock the glass off. We've got our data set here, so we can see what our data looks like. We can see we've got more than we added, and that's to support you. We've added extra fields that help you to do the stuff. And then our visual preview, I keep losing the mouse, there it is the bit that isn't highlighted because the mouse has just gone. We can see the dots around it that show us the borders. We can zoom in, we can do detail work. That's really the extent of the UI. We can see our results, we can tweak on the left. And we can have a look at our data. We'll do something a bit simpler because this is just showing us a simple bar chart. We can cross filter with that just to show you it's possible. Totally works. We'll talk about a different scenario. Now we'll build something up incrementally just because we're short on time, and I know you will have places to be. This is perhaps not the best layout, but we've got a slicer on the right here with all the different, we're going to learn about some Southern Hemisphere stuff now. These are a bunch of New Zealand towns and cities. Currently Christchurch is highlighted, which is kind of where I live, nearby. That's the nearest city I live to. We've got a little chart down here, which gives us our average temperature by month. And you can see it's winter over there right now, pretty much. I've got a Deneb visual, and what I want to do is I want to do something nice. I want to have some nice information density. So I'm going to explore a little bit. I'm going to add my year month field, which is my start of the month. So that's a date field that's the start of the month over all the time I have data for. I'm going to add my average temperature. And for time, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy paste. But we're going to open that up, and we're just going to create an empty specification. And we can see we've got nothing here. But I've got my data down here. Let me just zoom in. My year month is a date, and I've got my average temperature. And I've got a ton of rows because there's quite a lot of data in here. So very, very quickly, I'm going to make a simple line chart. And I'm going to increase that font size again because it's a different visual and we can't copy properties across. Thanks, Microsoft. So quite simply, this line here says bind to the data in this box here. So anything you add to this immediately gets bound in. We're going to add a line mark. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a line. It's like a line chart. And in our X and Y encoding, we're going to map the year month. And what we're going to do is specify that it's a temporal type, because with data and encoding it and scaling it, it's got different types. We have even spacing for categories. We have linear for measures. Time is a bit different. So we have to tell Vega Lite just what to expect there. Otherwise, it treats it as a category. With our y-axis, we're binding it to the average temperature, and we're saying it's quantitative, which is essentially linear measure. So you might call that a continuous in Power BI visuals. We'll hit the run button, and we've got this really, really noisy line chart. Now, you can't really divine much from that, apart from the fact that there's a lot of data in it. But what I'd like to try and do with that is make use of that footprint. So I can see I've got this much space. Let's say hypothetically, I've got this much space on my page, and I want to be able to read that quickly. I want to be able to understand across my timeline what's the hottest, what's the coldest. But I've got all this noise. So what we can start to do is, even though we've got two fields, we can maybe change the mark to a rectangle. That's not how you spell rectangle. That's just going to look all kinds of wrong. But we can start to explore. So the first thing I can do is in my x-axis, instead of just using the year month, which is the date field, I can add time unit. And I can say, why don't I put the year in there? And instead of average temperature, why didn't I just copy paste this? We'll get back to average temperature in a minute. And instead of using year, why don't I use month? And when I run this now, it's hard to see because we don't have the encoding yet, but we've now got a grid of month by year. One thing we haven't done with the month, it's ordered weird, right? It still thinks it's temporal. What we actually need to say is it's what's known as ordinal. So the concept of ordinal is ordered. So think about t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large, XL, XXL, and so on. We just need to tell Vega that we actually want to use, much like we have to have a sort column in Power BI for these kind of things with our date tables, we make it ordinal. So now we can see we've got Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June, etc. And we've got 1955 through the 2005. So right now, instead of having lines, we've immediately created a grid of stuff that we can really quickly intuit when we look at a page. So now we'll add in one extra encoding called color. And I'm going to map that to my average temperature. And that's going to be quantitative, which means it's linear. So when I apply this, I get an error because I left the comma in there. Doing stuff live is fun. But now we've turned that into a heat map. And what we've done is we've basically been able to see roughly what we kind of knew from the bar chart, but over time, we can see roughly what's the coldest and hottest months. So this isn't I apologize for the color, but you can change this. We're just short on time. You can change it to monochrome. You can change it to whatever colors work for your audience. There are some people that have actually worked out how to do different color schemes for different, work based off slices. So you can actually have a slicer for different types of color blindness. So you can do it. But what we can see is the coldest stuff is in the middle because that's when our winter is. The warmer stuff is January, December. But we can pretty much easily, we'd have to do a little bit of work because there's a lot of stuff there, but we can very quickly know roughly what the distribution of temperature is in that space. We know exactly how many months and years we've got, and we can zoom in. We can look at, 2015, December. It's right there. Instead of trying to find it on that line chart and work out where it is, we've immediately increased the density of our information. So this is the kind of stuff you can start thinking about. One thing we'll do now is we'll add interactivity. So with Deneb, we have a settings tab. I apologize, I can't zoom this too well for the people at the back. We've got the option to expose additional types of interactivity. So with Power BI, we've got tooltips, context menus, so we can right click and drill. Cross highlight, which is where we might click another visual and our visual updates, and cross filtering, which is where we click our visual and we want other visuals to update. So we don't turn the last two on because they require a bit of thought from you as a creator, but tooltips and context menus are stuff we can kind of do for free. All we really have to do with the tooltip, it's all well and good having this, but we can't really get context. We can see it, but how do we explore it? Well, we can very easily, here's one I prepared. I like saying that here because people know what it means. And here's one I prepared earlier, kind of thing. They don't get that in New Zealand. I have a tooltip page, and this is quite busy right now, but it'll make sense. But I've been able to pack a bit more info on here. And because that's my average temperature measure, what I can do, because Power BI works it out for us, I just have to say, on my rectangle mark, I just want to say tooltip, not tooltip. That's bad. True. So what I'm essentially doing here is turning the tooltip on. Now, the reason that's not on by default is because you might have labels. You may have a line or a body of text that provides a description. You don't want a tooltip on everything. So what we're telling the language to do is we just want tooltips to appear on this particular thing. So now when I hover over this point, I now get my tooltip. So I can see that it's September 66, and I've got my month's temperature in a line chart with error bands on. So that's all core visual functionality. But I'm able to get much more context, but I'm able to abstract to a higher level, and I can do that all in a single page with a single visual. And I can look around. I can sort of just do that whole thing. I can see June 97. This tooltip page is managed by Power BI, and all I had to do, Deneb handles the stuff underneath, just lets me figure that out. Now, if you use standard tooltips, you can customize that quite a lot as well. And you can actually add any field you want to add. You can actually add you can do your own calculations in the visual as well, and make those tooltips. So there's all kinds of stuff that we're not going to get to. But I would recommend, if this is piquing your interest, start having a look at the languages. It's really, really good. I will probably just jump straight to the end because it's 8 o'clock and we've all got stuff to do. If we enable the cross highlight and cross filtering, we get the ability to, we have extra fields added in. So we have this field called selected, and what selected does, Deneb handles that on your behalf. So for every tooltip, every data point that you click on, Deneb will keep track of that. So if I click on a square, it will map whether that's on or off, or not on, neutral, on, off, or neutral. So currently nothing's chosen. If I go to 31st of January 1954 and click it, we can see that that's changed to on, and everything is changed to off. That gives us a hook. So what we can actually do is we can tell in this language space here that we want everything else to be dimmed out, which is what Power BI visuals do. So we actually have the ability to change the behavior of our visual. We could also do different things. It doesn't have to be dimmed. It could have a border around it. It could have all kinds of stuff. So you just have to, there's conditions, there's all kinds of things. So we can do a lot of stuff. The other thing we can do just very quickly, and I'll just confirm that it works the other way as well. You can see our visual here is cross highlighted. So we're actually able to click on parts of the visual. We can control click, and we can see that things will start to update. We can also click on a visual here, and we've built in the functionality in our visual design to say, well, when someone clicks here, we know that this is partially available, so we can dim out the other stuff. So this is just a very quick sample of what you could do, but you can do a lot more. Something you can do, as I say, is transformations. So the concept of doing a calculation inside the visual, or multiple calculations, to take the data that's in that table and turn it into something else. So very, very quickly, and just to show you how easy it is, with the same data, let's just format that. We can do what's called a density plot. So for those of you that are familiar with histograms or violin plots, this is a smooth histogram of distribution of temperature. And all we said was do a density transform on that measure and then just map the X and Y to the values that come out. So there is a lot more to it, but in terms of the doc, and it's very, very flexible, but you can start to build some very, very rich designs. In terms of aspirational stuff, because you can, this is some basic stuff, and I would love to have maybe an extra, maybe half an hour just to dig into it. But I built this for actually Cole Netflix Storytelling with Data contest. I built this. So this is some data that NASA make available every month, and they baseline the global temperature against 1951 to 1980 average. So they get all their data around the world, they baseline it, and this is almost like a rings of a tree. The challenge was radial visuals, because radial visuals are hard. I thought I'll have a go at this. So the idea was thinking of the rings of a tree from 1880 through to 2023, out to in, months around the outside like a clock face. And what you can see is this 1951, and this effect as well was done with Deneb. We could just hover and get this little point that tells us where we are. Radiating outwards, we can see that it's getting pretty warm right now versus that baseline they took in the 50s to the 80s. I can click on the whole series, and there's some tricks we can do with Deneb to actually harvest up all those individual data points and cross-filter other visuals on a page. So I can see February, here's all my data points on the scatter plot that I built. And in my scatter plot, I added a line for the top 10 warmest months so that dynamically changes. I've also added this little square here with a pattern fill that shows where that baseline period was. So we can quickly look at that. And then down the bottom here is a little small multiple chart. Lots of tiny line charts for each month that show the time of the series. And these are all Deneb visuals. If you do want to know more about it, as I say, there's the website. There is a community page, because it seems daunting. The difference now from 2 years ago when I started to introduce this is people in the community are stepping up to help with that journey. It's not, I don't want to sound like, oh, you don't know how easy it was, but I had to learn languages and figure some stuff out. But other people were really, really, really great at understanding the potential and starting to demystify things. So on the community page, we have websites by some key people that I'll show you in just a sec. We've got some videos that are probably longer form intros of this session. So this is a session, I don't know if you know Reed Havens, he's an MVP in the US. He does Havens BI. He does a lot of videos on lots of areas of Power BI. Ben Ferry, Power BI guy, he's got a series on this. Power BI tips, if you're familiar with those folks. We've done some videos with them. Are any of you Enterprise DNA members? Yeah, Enterprise DNA have a course on Deneb.
They're New Zealand based as well.
Well, Sam is, yeah. The rest of them are kind of all over the place. But yeah, Sam's based in Auckland, the guy that runs Enterprise DNA. They have an actual 2-hour course where Greg, who's one of their experts, walks you through some designs. They also have challenges now. So every week they do a workout to give you things to try. They've also got a forum dedicated to Deneb where they help out as well. We've got templates. We've got a whole bunch of things that people do. So so Kerry, who is one of the first people to use Deneb, Kerry Kolosko, she's an MVP in Adelaide, Australia. She has a website. This is all linked from Deneb's website, but she experiments a lot with design, and these are all visuals she built in Power BI using Deneb. This one's quite controversial. This is breast size across the globe. She's got a sense of humor on it. But she built a Harry Potter radial visual with relationships. She replicated one of the, there's a reasonably infamous Leonardo DiCaprio visual where he doesn't date anyone over 25. She replicated that in Power BI using Deneb. lots of experiments, lots of fun stuff. So the trail mark, which can have thickness as well as thickness bound to data. So this is like Iron Man and Superman. But also in the Deneb sample workbook that you could download from AppSource, she has a page where she just she showed how you can prototype different ideas. So it's one of the articles on the site, but she was gracious enough to let me have it. But she wanted to think about different types of KPI visuals and how they could impact the users. So all of these are Deneb visuals with the same data, very subtle differences, but she was able to put these up to some of her stakeholders and say, right, well, what do you want to see? What works for you? What grabs your attention? What doesn't work? And these can be bound to, this is a parameter, but it could be bound to a measure where, we can actually have dynamic behaviors, colors, conditional things. This is all in there for you to play with. As I say, we've got access to certain, we can do pattern fills. We've got some limited support for that. We can bind to your theme. So this is the current theme in the report. So we can actually, the scheme you saw for the heat map, you can map it to your theme or a custom set of colors. You can actually access the sentiment colors and the individual theme colors as well. And you can actually shade them similar to the palettes are as well. So if we change that theme, let's change it to this one, then it will bind and work. So it's totally in line with your branding. And one I would like to share. So Tace, who's very active on Twitter, he took the whole big book of dashboards, if any of you have read that, which is typically done in Tableau, and he's made it all in Power BI and Deneb, and he's made that available for you to have a look at. Ben Ferry, Power BI guy, he posts his work plus his YouTube videos. Andrzej Liszkiewicz in Poland, he works exclusively in Vega, which is the more complicated one, but it's way more powerful if you've got the patience. He's got all his examples here. He did the climate stripes example, which is doing the rounds at the moment, and custom shapes. So this is a data bound horse, because why not? You can combine with the same data. You can draw multiple charts in the same container. So he's done an election swing chart. That's one visual. Both of those things are one visual, and it's interactive. Small multiples with lots of different variables encoded. And the one that he recently published to the World Data Viz Awards, which was done in Deneb as well in Power BI, is this floral cartogram, where everything, it's all about how we govern our world and all the indicators that the World Bank make available for each country. So the size, the color, everything. It's kind of like what you call an isotype map, where it kind of looks like a map, but it's not really geographically accurate. And he's got different legends on the side, but this is all built using that tool in a single visual. There's lots of examples out there. Power BI David Bachi, he's recently published this bank failure chart, which is doing pretty well on LinkedIn. That's in Deneb in Power BI. So this is a force-directed plot. You can see bank failures in quite horrible detail. Let's not worry about that for today. Calendar heat maps. These are all things that folks in the community are building and making available for people that may be interested in this to learn. So I am going to stop ranting, because I could sell this thing for hours, even though it doesn't make me any money. I love it. I'm going to stop there. Does anybody have any questions?
Something I could ask, but just when the name then.
Well, I even told you. I had to skip ahead. There was a slide, but I ran out of time. Here you go. Here it is. Find the slide. Legally slides. Let's zoom in. Let's zoom in. There we go. So get up and do a bit of talking. In the sky, you've got stars, and stars make constellations. The Vega team, they named the Vega product after the star Vega, which is the brightest star in the constellation of Lyra. For those that have used Python, there's a tool called Altair. That's actually Vega for Python. So you've got the constellation of Aquila, brightest star in Aquila is Altair. Vega, Altair, and Deneb are three stars that make up what's called the summer triangle. It's known as an asterism. It's part of three different constellations, but it's got its own sort of composite constellation. So Deneb, that was going. That's it. There's nothing more exciting than that. But the people that make Vega and the guy Jake who makes Deneb, Altair, really supportive in filling in the triangle. So it kind of made sense to me. It was really a code name, but people started to use the word, and it makes better sense to use it because I don't do marketing. I just like to write software. So it seems to have stuck, and that's basically it. It's not that exciting. Sorry. Hello.
It's free.
It's pretty certified.
As long as you know how to use it.
Yes, there is much benefit to purchasing commercial visuals like Zebra BI, InfoRiver, that do financial data really, really well. I would advocate, if that's your jam, do it. This is really focused, well, I was focusing on people that wanted to develop without the burden of having to go to web development. But what we've learned is that some people are actually really prepared to delve into it and have full control over their visuals. It does require some learning. It is very addictive. It does become very easy to pick up, like anything. It's just like, I know it's another language. I'm sorry, but it is a very well-known language, and it's not bespoke to Microsoft. So Vega, you can go onto websites, Stack Overflow, you can go to the Power BI community, ask questions, and the knowledge is portable. So if you do data viz in other areas, if you like your viz, you could work out and publish it somewhere else other than Power BI. So there's benefits to it.
You know, the current AI models, are they trained on Vega as well?
You're talking Chat GPT and things like that?
Yeah.
Not. It's getting better. Chat GPT 4 is better than 3. It likes to make up mark types. So if you say how to do a bullet chart, it'll say use the bullet mark. That doesn't exist. You would layer a couple of different marks, a couple of rectangles,
Right.
just to make bullets. There is the concept of what we call composite marks. So there's a box plot mark, which you just put in box plot and it draws a box plot, but it's like 3 or 4 marks underneath. There can be more marks added to Vega Lite you may get a bullet mark one day. But right now it's a bit cocky. But it's directionally correct. Like if you've used it for DAX, it's not always right, but it can get the job done. What's annoying is because Deneb is certified, it is not allowed to talk to external services. So I can't hook it up to ChatGPT, for instance. Microsoft won't let me do that. And most companies care more about the certification than that feature, unfortunately. So you had a question.
Yeah, so this is sort of our shine in the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have the same sort of libraries.
Yeah.
It's really just a way of giving a web-based, flexible grammar of graphics within the Power BI stack. But yeah, very, very similar.
I mean, it's this being used by commercial.
So I'll lay it out there. This is written by me for love. It is open source. It has no warranty per se, but it is an app source. It is certified, so it's not going away. I am actively maintaining it. Companies do use it, yes. I would love to tell you which ones, but I have done work for some pretty big companies to build bespoke visuals using this tool. So they will sometimes hire me to produce a very specific visual, and some companies have held out on Power BI due to one specific visual. We've got them over the line with if they've got one specific thing in, say, Excel. And no, you shouldn't always take Excel to Power BI, but this was a very, very specific industry standard visual that they needed. We could do it.
Last thing. So
Yeah.
You need a JSON, basically feeding JSON.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's something that a tool that's going to be used by analysts and not really developers. That's what you're aiming for.
Yeah, the tool is the aim was really for analysts, but it's honestly for everybody. There's lots of people use this. So if you go onto Twitter, LinkedIn, and have a look at just type Deneb Power BI, you'll see all kinds of different things being done with it. It is more popular than I intended. If you want, I'll tell you, it's not really a secret. I demoed this as a proof of concept at a user group 2.5 years ago. And I just said, look, we could conceivably do this. And I had a whole bunch of people say, I want this, please. Can you do it? And it was really them. I knew at least maybe 3 other people would want to use it. And we've got quite a few thousand people using it now. I would recommend trying it out. I will say, like I say, I don't really have to sell this because I'm not making anything from it. It's entirely up to you. You know, I'm not offended if it doesn't work for you or anything. It's just an option for you to do more in Power BI, essentially. Some people rely on it quite heavily. Some it's not for them. That's fine. You do you. Simple as that. Hello. David Batchy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Deneb all the time. Just to let you know.
He is one of, yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's encouraging more people to explore. Part of the reason why I came today.
Oh, wonderful. It's lovely that you came to see me. If you needed my opinion to sway, great. But he's really the person you want to see about why it's so good. He's really showing us how it should be done. And this is the beautiful thing. I'm giving people a tool. Like if I write a custom visual that does one thing, you've got my head or how I think it should work. You're locked into that. There's no flexibility there. Instead, if you're a creative person, and Kerry, who we showed, she was the perfect example of showing me, if you've got time to pursue an idea and prototype and iterate and try it, just how creative you can be and just what you can do. And she comes out with some amazing stuff. David's the same. Andre, who we saw, I'm getting taught so much by people, and that feeds into the product as well. They ask for things, we try and get them. Simple as that. But yeah, I would if you've kind of given him a bit of like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever, maybe pull up a chair and have a look and see what he can do, because he's doing some amazing stuff. But yeah, good to know. Thank you. Please send him my regards. I did talk to him this week, but send him my regards. Anybody else?
Can I ask what's in the future? We were just talking about that before the presentation. What's in the future for Deneb?
The future is taking over my life, but in a good way. I really like it. There's been so much work to try and get it functionally working as a custom visual. Power BI custom visuals are very, very, so despite what people might think about uncertified versus certified visuals, they're really locked down. It's very hard to do certain things with them. So a lot of the functionality I want just hasn't been possible so far. Things like auto completion, which is something you expect out of a code editor. It helps you make the language easier to learn. If you ever use the Vega editor, which is a tool that the Vega folks make available, you've got little tooltips that hover over the JSON and they tell you what it does. It links to the documentation. This is all stuff that's happening. I'm working on it. If I wasn't here, I'd be working on it back home right now. But I took a month off to come to the UK and see my family. But when I get back, I'm going to start working on that, get it going. So auto completion, hovering over the languages to get documentation, quality of life improvements for developers. And then there's more Power BI integration, drill through, field parameters, support. That's all being planned. The tools, a lot of visuals don't do that. We're trying to work out how to make it work.
Sounds like a full-time bloody project.
I take,
a lot of resources.
if I'm being honest, I work 2 days a week and I spend 3 days on this. Just making it work, because and I get a little bit of work out of it from the industry who need me to help them out, and that kind of keeps the wolf from the door. But I'm quite fortunate that I'm able to work on open source and people are using it. And I do get a little bit of sponsorship, which is quite nice. It is possible to sponsor Deneb. I don't try and put the cap out, but it is possible. It is essentially a full-time job. I'm thinking about it all the time because people are using it, and it's really exciting to me that people are using it because they're getting the things they need. It's a shame that it's not more tightly bound to Power BI. That's one of the challenges of core visuals. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff on the roadmap. It's just
Microsoft
getting it.
responsive.
I'm not saying that. Some people do say that. I'm grateful that I'm grateful to be talked about in that way. It's very, very affirming. But honestly, it sounds kind of fuzzy, but I get a lot of joy out of this. This is actually, I'm very satisfied in my work, which is sometimes that's worth a bit more than, if I can pay my bills, I'm happy. And I hear a lot of people around the world. It's been quite a journey, and it's still happening. But there's lots of stuff to come. So yeah, we'll keep. And if you use this and you like it, and there's things you want, there's a GitHub repository you can ask, and we'll see what we can do. We might not be able to do everything, but at least I'll tell you why we can't.
So thanks.
All right.
Any final questions, anyone?
Hey.
Sorry, Austin, weird. What are you doing with your IP? So you're sort of, how are you protecting yourself?
I'm not. It's open source. It's free. I don't mind. Somebody else. I mean, look at it this way, right? If somebody else comes along, takes it, and makes it better, great. I don't have to maintain it anymore. The community benefits. I didn't understand open source until I started writing it. The IP is really in here. My expertise is really using these languages to help people do stuff. My IP is evolving the product. There's no visuals like this. And to be honest, if somebody came along and could make it better, great, because everyone's going to benefit from it. So yeah, it seems weird, but it works. Yeah, so thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.